Hello again. Welcome to another episode of Leading from Alignment with our good friend, coach, mentor, John Opalewski. How are you today, John?
Hey Jim, I'm doing well. It's always good to spend time with you, catching up before we record.
Always.
And yeah, so today was no exception. It's good to be with you today. I'm
Right on.
excited about what we're going to talk through
I
today.
was going to say, in the last podcast, 159, you started sharing some good news, some things that are going well. I know we in our focus, we want to keep people healthy, and so we often talk with the things that make people unhealthy. But man, we're being proactive, and sharing good things that God is doing that we're seeing throughout the country in churches of all different shapes and sizes, led by men, led by women, different denominations, different demographics, and yet we're seeing some continual trends of good news. And so you shared with us last week. Tell us a little bit about last week. What did we talk about? Just
Sure.
a quick recap.
So yeah, we looked at two of the four promising trends in the local church. The first one was just the level of giving and
Yeah,
generosity that we have seen from the onset of the pandemic, continued through currently right now. So for the last what 2.5 years. And Jim, we talked about some of the reasons why that was. You mentioned online giving. And I think, man, that is such a huge
yeah,
contributor to the consistency
huge.
of giving. We
Yeah,
talked about people who left and never came back. Many of them probably weren't consistent givers, and the ones who remained, there was this sense of generosity that came
yeah,
over them, and they went above and beyond in their giving, and so we're very excited about that trend. For all the things that were difficult for pastors, for the majority of them, this wasn't an area of difficulty. And I'm so glad for them
yeah,
and happy for them that they didn't have to fight that battle along with everything else that they were dealing with. And the second one that we looked at was this new growth that's happening. There was a lot of attrition during the pandemic, and the new growth is a very interesting group of people, Jim.
yeah,
It's a lot of people who have never been to church before, or
yeah,
they've been away from church for a long time, but because of the chaotic nature of what's going
yeah.
on in our world, there is this movement of people, new people to church, and
Yes.
and our leaders are finding them incredibly uh, easier to pastor than
Yeah,
the people who left in anger, or the
yeah,
consumeristic type of believer. And so, very encouraged about that, right? That we're seeing that happen, and I think that the people who remained and the new people that are coming are actually easier to lead than
yeah,
some of the
yeah,
people who got their nose out of joint during the pandemic and left. So that's what
yeah.
we talked about in
Right
150.
on. And that's encouraging. It's funny. I was a part of that conversation, but I smiled all the way through the recap because when you're saying those stories, I'm thinking of the new faces. The couple that had COVID and she was on a ventilator for 50 some days, just a extraordinary long time in a coma. And we have a ministry school, and the regular ministries were canceled. So I just threw them in the church van, hooked up a lawnmower, weed whackers, blowers. We went out and just started mowing people's lawns. Well, that family, we mowed their lawn, and now they're faithful. We just baptized them. They both came back to the Lord after like a childhood faith. They had what they called a drug problem. Their mothers drugged them to church when they were little, but that was never their faith. And now it's their faith, and their kids are there, and seeds planted over the months of COVID have become fruit enjoyed
Mm,
now. And you're right; it's a good day to get saved. It's a good day to join a good church, and we're
yeah.
seeing it. What now? You said there's four things. Tell us about the other two.
Yeah. So here's the third encouraging trend that we're seeing in churches across the country, and that is simplification.
Yeah,
And that sounds a little boring,
yeah.
but actually,
Not to
it's
me.
exciting to me. Um,
Yeah,
if the pandemic did anything, it forced simplification of our playbooks.
yeah,
We use the word playbook. You might use the word programming. Uh, Post-pandemic, some churches have gone back to pre-pandemic playbooks that are stuffed with way too many plays. And that's disappointing to me. But many churches, I would say more churches than not, have learned from the pandemic, and they've not only maintained a simpler playbook, but I see this, Jim, I see this like ongoing focus on fine tuning their
Yeah,
programming.
yeah,
They're more focused. They're playing to their strengths, and they're a lot more picky about adding new stuff. So I wonder what
yeah.
you think about this third trend, Jim.
Yeah, well, I mean, we went from almost nothing being done right at the church on a weeknight, Sunday school, worship teams, greeters, security, ushers. There's nothing to we're adding back little by little. And because we came back little by little, there wasn't everybody came back. Now you have a full ushers team. Now you have a full security team. Now you have a full youth ministry. It added back little by little. And I think we realized as we're adding back, we didn't actually need everything that we were doing. Programs and ministries begin when somebody is passionate and starts them. But that started 30 years ago. They've been gone for a long time. But we
Yeah.
saw this expectation of this children's ministry on midweek or this Sunday school class or this. And those are all wonderful things as long as they're led by people that have a vision for it. There's fruit involved in it. It's not a traditional expectation of our church. So we just
Hmm.
find somebody. We often find people that don't have the gift for what we're asking them to do. Their gift is to be a servant. And when they hear the desperation of the need, they step forward and keep something running without vision. And then you get a church that's managed. Usually management leads to attrition,
Yeah.
eventually. So I think because we didn't have to add everything back, we were without it for months, if not years,
Yeah.
that we have learned to do as much. We learned to do what we do well with leaders that are inspired to be there, and those things will always prosper over the expectation based ministry of servant people
Yeah.
doing the best they can.
You said something interesting to me, Jim, the vision piece. So if a ministry was started 30 years ago, chances are that there's new leadership in place since the
Yes,
inception of that
exactly.
program or that play
Yeah,
that has been run for a long time. And I know this that over the course of 30 years, the destination, we think about vision as destination, right? Like where are we going to
yeah,
land? That
yeah,
can change over 30 years. So I wonder how often there's been a change in the destination, the desired, we talk about football, like I love football, the end
yeah,
zone. What's the end
yeah,
zone?
yeah,
And yet we're running plays that were for another time, that
yeah,
were for another destination. And and uh and I don't have any of these in my notes. This is all kind of this brand fresh in my mind here.
yeah.
I wonder how many programs were designed for a different vision.
Yeah. And I want to be really careful here because some people's identity comes out of being a
Understood.
teacher in that program or a leader of that
Understood.
program. But I remember early on, I asked a pastor that I got to Michigan, first time senior pastorate. I said, I got all kinds of questions. Who's the guy I should talk to? And everybody kept pointing to this one pastor, this one church. Ran into him at district council, a convention we have annually. I said, you don't
Mhm.
know me, I don't know you, but I keep hearing you're the guy to talk to. The thing they didn't teach you in school, the thing that isn't intuitive, the stuff that wasn't a class in college. What is that thing that I need to know? And he said you need to carefully cultivate an ongoing culture of change. Carefully cultivate an ongoing culture of change. And so we started from that every year. Everything we do and every person who does it, this is what we call it. It's our culture. It's okay. But it goes on trial for its life. It
Mhm.
doesn't have to defend itself, but it has to prove itself. And that way we don't have just tradition after tradition after tradition of lowering returns and saying, well,
Right.
this program will work if we just had more leaders. We just gave it more money. We just gave it its own environment. But if even after all that, it's not producing fruit, like, wait a minute, we're meeting a need that doesn't exist with people who don't want to be there.
Right.
And it'd be better not to have a ministry than to have a failing ministry, is my opinion. I'd rather there was no children's ministry than have a really bad children's ministry. It's better not to have a nursery than it is to have a nursery led by people that don't like children. So everything around here goes on trial every year for its life, including my own position, my role, every staff position. Is it still needed? Is it still the right fit? Is it still doing the right things, producing the right fruit? And not in a corporate way, like everybody's job's on the line, But we are honestly creating an
Yes.
environment where change, we cultivate change consistently because
Mm,
people's religious tendencies become their religious dependencies so quickly.
mm,
So that person isn't leading that song that way. I can't worship. That's
right.
not a problem with worship. That's a problem with the worshiper who
Yeah.
created a religious dependency on a certain methodology or time or so I'm all for what you're saying. Let's take things as it comes back. Let's analyze. Is it fruitful? Is it meaningful?
Yeah. And I've noticed this that this the churches that are staying the course with being simpler,
Yeah.
I'm noticing more health on their staff,
Yes.
more health with their team leads, their volunteers even,
Yep.
and and generally more health uh, as a church. Now, one of the questions, one pastor told me this, Jim, and I thought it was so interesting. He says, John, I think I've cut pretty much everything. It's like,
Yeah.
or I've simplified as much as I can. And there is a
Yeah.
point, right, where
Sure.
um, you know, the playbook is simple. I
Yeah.
would say this, that sometimes you'll take a play out and you'll never replace it with anything. It's just gone
Yeah.
from the
Yeah.
playbook. But
Yep.
sometimes you'll take a play out to make room for a new play
Yeah.
or a new program. So if you're listening today or watching today, here's the takeaway on with this third trend I'd like you to think about is to keep your playbook simple and pour gas on your best plays. And I don't mean to burn them up, thinking to
Give them
fuel
fuel. Yeah.
right? Add fuel to the things you're great at, the things you do super well, and don't get distracted by the myriad of opportunities that are going to put themselves in front of you
Yeah.
in the days and weeks ahead. Um,
Yeah.
keep it simple, and I see that trend. I'm very encouraged by that trend. Jump on that train. I think it's going to be super helpful to you, the
Yes.
organization you lead. Here's the fourth one, Jim.
Yeah.
So we talked about giving and generosity, seeing
Yep.
that really uptick. This wonderful new people growth,
Yeah.
simplification, and here's the fourth one: a focus on health. And Jim, that's just the music to our ears, right?
Yeah.
Because I
Yeah.
think if we talk about one thing on the podcast, we've been doing the podcast now for 3 years. Can you believe that? Um,
No.
it's excuse me, it is this well-being and health, and it's so encouraging to me, Jim, to see this.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
when we started talking to pastors uh, 15, no, 20 years ago about this stuff, very few churches, very few denominations were paying
Yeah.
attention to this. 20 years later, we see this, we see this growing upward progression of pastors and leaders and churches and organizations paying attention to this.
Yeah.
Um, the last 2.5 years placed unbelievable stress on leaders, and it forced them to make a decision.
Mhm.
Either I quit, which more than a few have,
Yeah.
or I learn how to get healthier so I can lead in a sustainably fruitful way. And not
Yeah.
only are pastors talking about this, Jim, more, they're putting their money where their mouth is. I
Yeah.
mean, they are hiring mentors and coaches and counselors and
Yeah.
fitness trainers, nutrition trainers. I love it.
Yeah.
All in
Yeah.
there
So
to help
good.
care for themselves in a holistic fashion,
Yeah.
spiritually, mentally, emotionally, physically, and even relationally. So
Mhm.
I'm just super excited about that. I wonder what you think.
Yeah. I
This,
think again, when I'm working, and I'm snapping my fingers. If you can hear it, I'm not sure, but it just boom, 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 and then I go fishing for a week in Canada. It's funny how it gets dark and I go to sleep. It's 9 o'clock at night, but I'm sound asleep because it got dark, and I'm not so wound up. I got to watch 3 hours of television to wind down, kind of stuff. And you go back to a natural rhythm. Well, I think COVID forced everybody. And so as life was tempted to get back to this craziness, I think a part of our soul that it was a tough season, but a part of us got healthier during that rest. I think a part of us said, I don't know if I want to get that crazy again. And so as you
Right.
start to head back into a crowd of people and the demands and a schedule and a budget and appointment and board meetings, I think people said, you know what, I never want to go back to that being normal again. And they're
Right.
being proactive to keep that, a reasonable distance away. And there's seasons, right? You got a
Of
Easter
course.
vacation, Bible school, summer camps, whatever. There's seasons that you just have to work really hard. But I think you ever been on vacation and you didn't know how tired you were until you
Yes.
started feeling better? And you're like, I had no idea I haven't felt this good. I forgot what feeling good felt like. That's how long I've been tired. I think COVID did that for us. And we know what good feels like in a long season. And so bad stands out. So I agree. I think they're like, I'm not going back to the pressure cooker. I'm going to find ways to be fruitful, to be obedient, to be a good steward, but I am not going back to a an ulcer being common in my life or
Yeah.
depression being normal. I want to be free from that.
Right. So we're seeing this formula from the past, work until you drop,
Yeah,
being rejected, or a
yeah,
healthier one, work hard. We're we're all, you know what? We're not telling you that laziness is good. Oh, we're
not at all.
saying work
Yeah,
hard, but
yeah,
also work hard at resting.
yes,
Work hard and work hard at renewal.
yeah,
Work hard and really work hard at your relationships, the
yeah,
ones that really feed you. And
yeah,
so, Jim, it is so exciting to me to see this trend taking off. I was in Pennsylvania uh, just a little bit ago with about 250 Baptist pastors for
yeah,
a one-day conference. And there was so much focus, Jim, on well-being and
good.
not just talk, but putting their money
Yeah, good.
behind this effort. And it was
Yeah,
and so Jim, we're seeing this. I was in South Carolina a few weeks ago. Same thing, same emphasis. And I think to myself, wow, this is catching on. And I'm
yeah,
I'm so encouraged by that, because for so many years I felt like I was trying to empty the ocean with a teaspoon, just like
yeah,
how we,
yeah,
but I see this wonderful, amazing, incredible trend and focus on health. And
yeah,
I mean, out of all four trends, all of these four trends make me happy. This one makes me the happiest.
yeah,
This is the one I'm
yeah.
the most excited about.
If I could change your analogy, John, you weren't trying to empty the ocean with a teaspoon. You were building an ark before anybody really knew what rain was. But
Mm,
but I think COVID really and all the things going into it and out of it, that reset, I think Converge and specifically your story, your ministry has positioned you well for the storm that we've endured. And you're teaching us more than how to swim. You're teaching us how to create an environment that doesn't sink.
mm,
That's good for our people. It's good for our families. Um, I hope that there will be a day where we say preacher's kid. It doesn't have that negative connotation,
yes,
or
yeah,
pastor's wife. We go, I know what that means. Like, no, it means healthy. It means loving. It means strong. It means blessed.
yeah,
Versus family members who had to sacrifice because of the ministry to a point of dysfunction and burnout and failure. So these are great lessons to learn, and four encouraging trends, four
yeah,
good things that are happening. What would you say to somebody who goes, I'm not, I haven't learned the rest thing. It's still me. I'm still working hard. The giving is the same.
yeah,
These are four good things, but if I'm not experiencing them, this might be discouraging news. What would you say to someone
yeah,
who's,
yeah. So if you're not experiencing any of these, first of all, we feel with you
yeah,
that, we because Jim, you and I, in one way, shape, or form, have experienced distress in the past over these four areas.
sure.
And
Yeah.
we know what it feels like. It's
Yeah.
hard. We get that. I would say this. I think you need to get around some people
Yeah.
who are experiencing this and hang out with them. And you might think, well, I don't
Yeah.
belong. I don't belong at that table. Yes, you do.
No. Yeah.
You do belong at that table. And I think there's something wonderfully encouraging. Uh, and let me say this. Don't pick people who are full of themselves.
Right. Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
sometimes leaders who are experiencing success, or fruit,
Right.
can get full of themselves. I'm talking about people who are experiencing some success, but have their head screwed on straight,
Right.
that are humble, that are relational, that would encourage you.
Yeah.
That's what's coming to mind for me, Jim, is
Yeah.
get around some people. Don't isolate. Don't say, well, I'm not experiencing these, so I'm embarrassed. I don't want to be
No.
around. No, I think that's the wrong direction. Get around a
Right.
couple of guys, get around a couple of leaders who are experiencing some success and say, man, can I spend
Yeah.
some time with you?
Yeah.
Um,
That's
I
good.
want to learn. I want that whatever's happening in you to rub off on me, so to
Yeah.
speak. So that's what I'm
Yeah.
thinking. I don't know what you think about that thought, Jim.
Yeah. You talk about a table. The phrase came to mind, a table of plenty has room for somebody without plenty,
Yeah.
right? That there's actually more room at that table, more encouragement at that table, more provision, love, strength to be shared. So the thought that I'm failing, like, no, I don't know if anybody even knows that they're succeeding or failing, because what we're being judged on is quality and fidelity, good and faithful. That's what we're being judged on by our master. So numbers and dollars, and I think being around people that have been blessed, it is a greater blessing to share your blessing than to receive a blessing and not share it. They would enjoy
I
encouraging
agree.
you. When someone calls you discouraged, do you say, "Man, I'm glad that phone call's over with," or do you say, "I'm so glad I was able to encourage that person"? So
Yeah.
it's a lie, right? That I shouldn't be around
Right.
blessed people because I'm not blessed. That's a lie. If you're not blessed, you should be around blessed people, because their blessing is incomplete until you are blessed. That's
Mm,
that's the way a
that's so
family
good.
works. Yeah. Hey, one last thing about rest and so forth in this. I had a wonderful, I guess, revelation or thought that came to me a few weeks ago, and that was when I'm resting, and I'm resting in a Sabbath way. I'm trusting God with this sundown to sundown, period of my life. I just felt like the Lord quickened my heart. He said, "Everything you touch today will have been touched by you, but everything you don't touch today, I will touch on your behalf." Now,
Wow.
whose hand do you want touching your marriage? Whose hand do you want touching your ministry? Whose hand do you want touching your children or your
So good.
finances or your health? And it has really revolutionized in my mind the thought of Sabbath as, instead of a sacrifice of Sabbath, like a sacrifice of generosity or a sacrifice of praise. It's like, once you realize that praise positions you for something, and generosity positions you for something, and Sabbath positions you for something. So I would just, in closing, I say, I don't have time to rest. I don't have time to change the pace of my life. I would say this: everything you put your hand to on your day off this week, you will have put your hand to, and your efforts will produce some fruit. But everything you don't put your hand to because you're giving it to the Lord as an offering, I really believe God will touch those things in ways that you can't touch them, those areas, those ministries, those circumstances. Like, trust the Lord and get some rest,
Yeah.
because you're honoring Him when you rest in that way. And He will honor your obedience and touch the things that you do not. If you refuse to touch Him, I think God has promised to touch them. That's what I believe about Sabbath. So thank you,
That's
John,
good.
so much for wisdom. I love that you get to talk to hundreds of pastors and come back and have a one-on-one conversation, because that's what this podcast is. It's you and I talking, but there's a third person at this table with us right now, and we're all blessed by your experiences and your wisdom. Thanks so much. So convergecoach.com, 30 minutes. Let's hang out. Let's see what's happening in your world, how we can help. We're here for you. We love you. Good things are happening. Be encouraged. And if good things aren't happening, find somebody that has an abundance to share, and go to their table and eat until you're full, and go back to your table then, with a full heart rested. Let God do the work. Don't be lazy. Don't be an overachiever. just be you by the grace of God. That's all He's ever asked you to be. I'll never put His grace on your imitation of somebody else. Be you. God created you for a reason in this season, and God's going to use you. So God bless you, our listeners, our watchers, as you continue to lead from alignment.